slowness with my little arrow here. All right, so for those of you that haven't already completed a lot of units, maybe this might even be your first semester, something that really, really helps, whether you're going to do assessments in person, like take a quick quiz in person in a class, or whether it's going to be online, and you've got several different conversations or topics that you need to refer to, do be sure to not merge your notes all together in just one super long thing. Separate them out, turn a page, do it on something else, or change the color of your big marker that you use for the title. That will help you too, when you go to review or look back on it, remember everything that was part of one conversation. This is more important for you in terms of strategies for learning and assessments. If it is within a topic that you don't know very much about already, when you really have to start making those new mental cognitive file folders, which is probably what is the case for most of us in a class like this. All right, so we are going science and the scientific method. You all are two different perspectives on learning about something using data. We're going to start with really what is science and how does science define our usable data. Scientific method will be later. We're not going to work on that with specifics in this file, but it will come up. All right, so we're going to start with what's the nature of science, and a vocabulary word that is not super highlighted in your reading, but it needs to be super highlighted in your in-class time with me today. Empirical evidence. I'll type it over onto the side. All right, empirical. We'll linger for you there. As we work through that, the second part of this big conversation will be the process of science. There's also a bit of this in the beginnings of chapter 2. The process of science means how do we measure, collect, recognize, and analyze that empirical evidence. So that would be scientific method. Most all of you have had some specific or very specific classes or learning on scientific method or process. So if you had biology lab in high school or chemistry lab in high school, or anything where you are working through answering a problem using measurement data, then you have got some of that. So this one we won't do in as much detail. We're going to do nature of science, a little bit more detail. So what do these two things have together, and what's the big concept here? For our whole course too. Science represents accumulating or having access to a body of knowledge. Knowledge is going to be specifically defined in this conversation for our class. And also the process for learning or collecting that knowledge. Okay, so let's start. Empirical. Everything that is in the true realm of science, science academically, science professionally, real, looking at collection of information about certain kinds of things in our experience or our world, is always going to be based on this, empirical. Initially, all of our ancestors collected empirical data as well, and this is going to go back millions of years. In fact, we can also measure the collection of empirical evidence or data by other types or species of animals. It's more difficult for us to get a lot of data on how they do that for every kind of species of everything. But those of you that do have pets know that when they observe something going on, or right, they have an odor, a sound, visual, something that might be a pressure or a touch, and the taste of something, that is registered and collected, and then they use that going forward. For those of you that maybe, for instance, have dogs in your household, you have noticed that when you put on a pair of shoes or go to a particular hook on the wall where there's the leash, or pick up a particular set of keys or whatever it is, that they know what that means. That is empirically using observable data. Right now, you don't hear my cat screaming, but at a certain time in the morning, when it usually is my schedule where I take a break, they'll both come in and just scream behind me because they know that that particular time is snack time and they want to remind me of that. You've seen those really fun videos, right? And tons, even just short ones, that just some little thing happens and your animals know how to do this. Well, this is happening with you as well, and it happened with our ancestors as well. So observable phenomena that's detected by the senses. At a certain point in our understanding of humans, by collection and analysis of empirical data, we know that eventually humans started to notice that there was phenomena that maybe a human's senses couldn't hear or see, but that other organisms could, and that we did need to invent ways to collect that data. Now, this is not a negative comment towards you at all. It's just a little wake-up snap so that you know that when you start a brand new course that's more specific than maybe the way that we've looked at it before, that there may be terms that, or perspectives or circumstances that you feel as an adult you know a lot about already. But do be aware that we might actually just personally feel like we know all there is about that, or know what all those words mean, then we don't actually have a lot of data on. So there's nothing wrong with that. That is part of being a more focused learner. It's just that sometimes you will see that I'm going to point out a few terms or perspectives that that the general public holds that aren't actually accurate. For instance, when we're little kids, they tell us that we've got, right, the 5 senses. We have more than 5 senses, but we tend to learn those terms when we're very, very young in most societies. And therefore, seeing, smelling, hearing, tasting, and touch is just kind of holds on. And then we think that that's going on the same all over the place. But for instance, pressure isn't the same sense as temperature, right? Or pressure isn't the same sense as pain. And in some societies, depending on what they eat and how they fix it, you might have learned that there's only certain kinds of phenomena for taste. But those are different receptors, and we don't even all have exactly the same amount or percentage of certain receptors than others. The definition of the term theory is a big one, so we will work on this as we go through the course constantly. Because the way that it is used in popular English in our society that we're participating in right at this moment is different than what it actually means scientifically. Details on monkeys. Going to the zoo, people feel that there's a lot that they know about monkeys, and it's generally well-intentioned, but not necessarily empirically accurate. So this type of course becomes a requirement as you move through and a formal educational environment, so that you get a little bit of way of how to look at things, how to understand what a researcher is actually presenting, and for you to be able to know when somebody is telling you a perspective or saying that they have a solution or something else, and know that they really don't have any empirical data, or they are maybe swiping over the details that you need to know in order to make a better decision. Okay, so empirical. Empirical evidence is objective. Type this one over here too. So objective. Doesn't mean anything mean. So objective. Objective means that, and this is, you'll be able to see right away why this matters to us, that the data, right, the measurable phenomenon, whether that's the weight of something or how often it happens or its DNA signature or wavelengths of energy or something like that, that the empirical, measurable, quantifiable data or evidence can be collected by anyone who wants to confirm or look at it themselves. So objective evidence means that it isn't only something that one person could experience, one country could experience, one academic or research group can experience. It has to be something that can be verified or backed up by others. So for instance, you're getting objective or empirical evidence when you use a thermometer. It's going to give, as long as it's in good condition, the same results regardless of who's using it, as long as they use it in the same way. That's a simple one. So you all, in our course, on your life science course, biological anthropology, especially once we get back into class, you'll notice this as well. All of your points in the class are objective. They're all objective. Were you there and did you complete that face-to-face activity? Yes, you get 15 points. No, that wasn't completed. Or the questions that we're going to be answering, for instance, in a quiz or an exam. The questions are going to be based on things that we looked at and that you had access to and we spent some time on. And then there is a response that is the accurate one. When you take other courses, sometimes your points are subjective, right? If you've had a class or done something where people are watching, listening, interacting, and then they rank you, yikes, right? Some of the stuff that's very painful personally. Ranking of things is subjective. That means that there isn't any full standard that everyone has to work with. So, whoops, let me go back. That was too quick. Right? So when we see reviews of the arts, that's subjective. If you've been in a class where you have to give a presentation and your classmates are going to do some checkoff or comments on a card, that is subjective. It's how they processed it and what they think is going on. All right, so going back to an objective way of collecting data, not just with your own senses, but with machinery that we can use to do that. Then the temperature that's measured, if it's a well-calibrated thermometer, will produce empirical evidence. That means that there needs to be a standard for the production, a standard for how often that process or equipment is evaluated or rendered working fine in everyday English. And periodically looking back in to make sure that what we thought that equipment could do and measure is still what it can do and measure. Say, for instance, for people that are picked up for driving under the influence, first step is to, if you had to do it with the breathalyzer or some other way, blood test, is to double check and make sure that measurement instrument had been recently looked at, verified, well calibrated. If it isn't, then they can't proceed with the punishment or the evaluation of that. Okay, next one. So empirical evidence is a source of knowledge. For us in this class, not for you individually or your entire life, but for our course, when you see in your reading or we're working on something together, the use of the term knowledge, it means we know about it empirically. So again, it's why sometimes conversations of people with totally different backgrounds end up coming to any useful results because they aren't using words in the same category of definition. So observation or experimentation. While we do that, then we're going to have the data that we cut up from it. How often did that happen? When did it happen? What did it weigh? How fast was it going? What happened when you turned it on? What happened when you turned it off, right? We're very familiar with these. So in an empiricist view or a scientific view, we only have knowledge when we have information, conclusions, and explanations that are based on empirical evidence. And so for us, I didn't bold it or anything, but it is, again, a specific definition that we need to work with in our course, right? For maybe quizzes, exams, or things that we're going to learn about as we go. This is the way that we define fact for our particular perspectives here. An example of something that has been super problematic for several decades now. It became more common for health and developmental care for young children to recognize that there was kind of a long sliding scale of things that might show up in the ability to interact, socialize, and learn for youngsters. And that in the early stages of this, they didn't really have any genetic, brain chemistry, or other kinds of data to do that. So a man who was a medical doctor published a paper in a journal saying that he believed that he had data from studying some children that would support his perspective that this type of learning changes were related to getting vaccinated. This was, oh geez, at least 20 years ago, I think now. That was published. A whole bunch of news services of people, not scientists at all, picked it up and put it on the news and scared the living daylights out of a huge number of parents. And in some societies where we are needing or want to use the legal profession too to punish or get help or other, whoops, somehow. Okay, in order to, I'm having a morning. Okay, in order to work on that particular study, it was within a day of the publication of this article that professionals said, show us your data. How many children? How long did you study them? What biochemical data do you have? What brain scans do you have? The doctor that published the article didn't have any empirical data. He did have an emotional situation going on because he had a child that had showed up with some of these circumstances. And he had looked at only 5 children in one daycare setting. He hadn't done any research. He couldn't back up anything he had to say. He published it because he was hurting. So immediately the scientific world got all over it and said, no, 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 this is not what's happening. It is not linked in any data that we have right now to vaccinations, but it was too late for much of the world, who then not only swallowed that whole, but have been using it for decades since then. to be terrified of the concept of vaccination of children. We've been vaccinating children to keep your ancestors alive in many places of the world for a couple centuries. It's not new. And it's not unusual for that. Now, since then, there has been a lot more collection of data, and it does turn out that they can link some of those things to certain minute biochemical changes, maybe perhaps in the way that cognition is running or the brain, but it is not directly linked to any one particular vaccination or the concept of vaccination. So yeah, this is what happens sometimes when people say, use all these words. I did research, I have a fact, this is the conclusion. Empirically though, we need to wait when somebody says something brand new and then see if they actually have any data that can be, right, duplicated by other researchers. Okay, so how do we do that? Now, there's a lot of vocabulary words for how this works, and you're familiar with most of them, but let's just pull them all up a little bit. Again, just so you have them all kind of in one spot. So science can only study the physical and natural world and how the physical and natural world works when we can collect empirical data. Science cannot study certain things. We don't pretend in science that we can study everything empirically. We cannot. This is part of the awesome large dimension of being a modern human and thinking about these things. So for instance, science can study the physical and natural world in relationship to aging and what changes and how that affects us and how long we live with some of those changes. But science can't study the death state, because once you're dead, you're not making any data. So death needs to be investigated, thought about, interacted with using a different perspective. So if we have explanations that are scientific, then they have to be something that is testable, right? You have to be able to set up a way to decide what you think the main concepts are and run through your research and collect data on it. That means that anyone needs to be allowed to repeat that test and that they know that they are in position to refute, right? To say, no, it didn't work. We ran this 250 times and whatever it was that you were doing, we could not repeat that and get the same result. Always again, empirical, right? Numeric, we can get a measurement somehow or another. So science always has to involve community. There has to be not only the people that are thinking of the questions and want to get the data and run the scientific circumstances or experiences, or you could call them studies, experiments, and so forth. But there has to be another group who are outside of that original first steps, who know how, when, and why to try to repeat that. And when we are testing and working on answering things with empirical data, calibration, right? An openly acknowledged standard for how that equipment needs to work. And then a real researcher, whether it's a group or an individual, is going to give their scientific community open access to exactly all their steps, how they collected the data, how long they collected the data. If let's say it's something to do with people, how many people they looked at, who they were, right? Was it related to biosex? Was it related to age? Was it related to some other type of genetic combinations for those people, so that they can look at the process and the results? Because in order to do this the way it has to be done, so that we can rely on it and feel confident, it needs to be open to repetition. If you ever have the chance or this becomes your profession, or you see something maybe on an online environment. When researchers go to national or global scientific meetings for their profession, and somebody is presenting something that they have collected data on, done the analysis of, and maybe come to a new perspective on, the crowd is very, very pointedly assertive and aggressive to get that person to answer their questions and turn things over. It isn't always going to be super friendly sounding because it's new, right? They need to make the person say everything so that they can do that. So it isn't, it isn't as boring and not much going on, droning of talking that you might think. They are very, very pointed, because accepting what someone has discovered requires that. It needs to be refutable, or maybe you can verify. All right, so for us in our course, using the term fact, here's another one that shows up lots in the general public, not just for us right now, but going back a lot of decades, but also it happens in other places in the world too. But this particular term for English speakers has got some dramatic things going on with it right now. So the popular definition, popular here mean populace, the general public, not the one that we like the most, but just for the general public, the way that they define the term fact. And that does also very largely right now, you all, include business in our capitalist style economy that we're living in right now. The way that they define fact is not the same as it is scientifically. So this will be a question that'll show up in your quiz, and it's going to be a question that shows up on the exam, because this is one of the core things for us to get comfortable with in our class, using the term fact. Popular, for the populace, for people that just went through school, maybe finished up high school, and then maybe didn't do more, or went to college but never really took any more science classes, don't really work this way in their professions and so forth. When they use the word fact socially, or when they're trying to get you to purchase something, pay for something, or invest in something, they leave this term fact as being related to 100% certainty. You can trust that. You can spend your money on that. It is going to work out this particular way. You've seen those ads. How to get your partner to be more attracted to you, what to buy so that you look better to strangers, what to take so that you can lose weight, what never to do because it's not going to work out for you, right? The popular use of fact is 100% certainty. Even if the person who's using that term isn't really familiar with what it is they're talking about, hasn't studied it, hasn't examined it, hasn't seen it happening. In science, it's different. This term, corroborated. Corroborated is a college word that'll mean highly supported, analyzed, those sorts of things. Can be a couple other terms here you might be more familiar with. So we're going to more specifically define what a hypothesis is in just a bit here too. So highly corroborated hypothesis or set of data. But that means in science that they've done the repeated testing, that they've collected a tremendous amount of empirical or measurable or repeatable data, and that the data is reliable. the more that science looks at anything, the planet, the universe, genetics, species, our behaviors, and so forth, we recognize we've only been doing these kinds of studies for an extremely brief period of time. And then they need to be humble and say, we do acknowledge that we have not tested to support or refute every single dimension of everything in our existence. You can take an entire class on the human brain, you can get an entire degree on the human brain, and still the people that do that for a living will tell you what we know about the human brain is a fraction of what we need to investigate. We really don't have that much of awesome data and analysis for some of these things. So with science, when we use the word fact, we mean that in an overwhelmingly large percentage of circumstances that have the same variables, that we're going to get a particular phenomena or occurrence. And that saying that it doesn't happen that way would be irrational. Irrational, you all in college, doesn't mean something personal. It doesn't mean purpose. It means not with ratio, right? You don't have the numbers, the percentages, the support, right? The data collection support. So how does this come forward as something that creates headbutting, arguing, confusion, and real problematic other things in regards to making decisions, passing laws, moving forward with treatments for things or solutions to problems? What happens is that when somebody isn't in agreement with something that science is saying, look, this is how it's really working, we need to make these changes, the person oftentimes in an argument will say, so you're saying that this is a 100% fact. And a professional scientist will say, no, nothing is a 100% fact. And so then the person who's trying to win the public over to their non-scientific perspective will look at the audience and say, see, they're lying. See, they don't know. They just told you it's not a fact. And so these are pointless arguments to listen to because they're really using the same words in two different ways and other sorts of things. So scientists have gotten a lot more familiar with what they should and shouldn't participate in, which makes things much more difficult or challenging for those to go on with those kinds of circumstances. So fact in the general perspective. And where did we get that definition of it? We've had business, right? Corporate business, Wall Street, investment type things, people making products, sell us those products saying, this is 100%, do this, it's gonna work. Oh, you need to not use this one anymore because this is the improved version of it. Just because they're making a product doesn't mean that they're scientists, it means they need you to buy something, right? They want to get us to give up lots of our income on things that in many cases we don't actually need, but we would like to use them. And that's a totally different, right? That's a totally different perspective and type of study academically. Okay, so science is going to be, if they say that this is the way that it works, it means that every time we study it with the data that we can collect, the procedures that we can collect, and the people that can run and evaluate these, that they are getting a reliable outcome to the circumstance. All right. Okay, just to back up just a moment here again, because this is not necessarily the most easy to illustrate type of conversation. This isn't new. We'll just do it one more time because repeating is how we remember. Science is composed of corroborated, right? Working together, data collection, measurable empirical data that comes together. It has been, as a scientist reports the results, it has been repeatedly tested using reliable data so that it would be now irrational, really, in other words, not the way that it's actually physically or measurably happening to deny the phenomena or the occurrence or the relationships. So a scientific fact is a reliable conclusion, which means that the relationship is predictable. And predictable means, again, with a strong percentage of occurrences that have the same variance, you're going to have the same outcome, the same results, or the same relationships. Are we ever finished with collecting information about something that we've done major studies of in science? Nope. We recognize in science, you will too, you're living in the science type world here also, recognize that things do need to be re-investigated, re-analyzed, take a look at what's going on at the moment, and so on and so forth. What's a really important one these days? In the 70s, they did a certain amount of scientific investigation of cannabis, for instance, and what the basic biochemicals were, what its outcome was when people used it in a variety of ways, whether you inhaled it or consumed it in another way, and so on and so forth. And so they collected a lot of samples, had a big centralized research area that was the biggest one in the US, was actually on a university's grounds, which is interesting for that. And then quite a lot of time went by and they hadn't really looked at it or thought about it too much. A couple decades later, they ran the results again and found out that the potency of cannabis is nothing today like it was when a long time ago. It is vastly stronger and has many more variants and a lot more uses or things that we need to think about it. So re-studying something that we've collected data on, right, is what we need to do. So we're never really at the end. It's not the same as business where they say, if you buy this and you eat this, then this is going to happen. If you do this, then people will respond to you in this particular way, that kind of thing. Okay. All right. This is, let's do a couple more slides here this morning. And we're going to do these to take a look at the concept of science in another way that's really useful scientifically, which is to say, if something happens or occurs in this way, then how do we know when we're looking at something that's an opposite, right? To say this is its own kind of thing because there's something that doesn't work that way. So I would, if you jot things down, I would just go down a couple lines and start with another big heading. So this will be part 2 of this one, which is, how is empirical observation different from personal belief or faith? Now, I didn't capitalize faith here or belief, because this is not specific or even mainly about something that in English we might call religion. This is, while it could be that religions, some, not all, fit into this particular type of experience for humans, they're not the only one, and it's not even the thing that's all day, every day for everyone on the planet. So this is not about saying something mean or derogatory towards faith-based systems. Okay, what's the opposite then of coming to or stating observations that are not based on scientific fact or evidence? So when we use belief or faith academically as terms, it means that we have confidence or trust in, it could be a person, it could be a thing, it could be a deity, right? Something that's immaterial, or it can be teachings, doctrines, something that we're just going to just real quickly say religion. This isn't the giant purpose of our entire course. What would be a course you could take where this is the whole course? Philosophy. So we're kind of contrasting, how does science examine the world versus how does philosophy examine the world? Not the same way, because they're not looking at the same type of activities. Yeah, go ahead. You have a question?
This
Go ahead. Did your mute is on, so I can't hear you right now.
Hello?
Yeah,
Hello?
hi. There you
So
go.
this reminds me of Durkheim's view of religion. Religion basically was it distinguished between the sacred and the mundane. Like there's not bringing up deities, but instead religion as like a belief system and not so much like God or any of that stuff. That's what this reminds me of, what you're saying right here.
Yes.
Like,
Yes, because multiculturally, right? Ethnicity, cultures, languages, from the dawn of time, people needed to talk about and relate back and forth to each other, things going on in their worlds, in their minds, for instance, having a dream, things that you see, that there wasn't any real observable way to recognize how that was going on. Now, religions do that for lots of folks in the world, but that's not how we understand everything in our experiences. So yeah. So let's look at a couple more. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, the example I was thinking of was like someone being allergic to something and therefore they don't eat it because they're allergic and that's a predictable reaction, versus like I ate this food this one time and I got food poisoning and I'm just not going to eat that ever again. Sort of like personal belief or faith.
Yes. Well,
I know it's not exactly the same thing, but
yeah. But you're close, Juliana. Like for instance, in our society, most of you, not all of you probably, but most of you were raised within, for years and years as you were coming up, within a culture that does not define insects as food. But some of you come from families where insects are food, like Central America, places in maybe the African continent, Asia, and so forth. So for them, they have knowledge about their world, and they'll tell you it's a fact. Bugs aren't food. Humans don't eat this. This isn't what we eat. Versus having some scientific evidence about it. So beliefs are going to be things that we might learn, share, or that are unique to us individually. Like you had a dream. We can measure in your brain that you had a dream. That's empirical. But what the content of your dream is not verifiably empirical. So it has to be the person that tells somebody else what their dream was about. So that if you accept that, if you say, yes, my sister had a dream about, then you are having personal belief or faith, not scientific fact that it happened. And so when we're closer and we bond, we can problem solve and so forth in ways that are a little bit different. Okay, so it's not going to be, the term belief then or faith is when we have something that we operate on, and I say we by individuals or various places on the planet, that doesn't require empirical measurable proof or what would be scientific fact. So for instance, the people today in our society that will say that they believe that vaccination is dangerous and it's killing us, that is belief or faith in something else. That's not empirically supported. Empirically, we will say factually that there are some tests that show that a very small percentage of people do not have a body system that will accept certain things put inside of your system. And as Juliana just mentioned, that could be something that is food, that might be something you put on the surface, that could be something that's medication, and so on and so forth. All right, so proponents of the big faiths, the ones that we hear more about in the world that you're currently kind of a little bit more overwhelmed by or participating in, none of that is judgmental. It is part of being human. They often say that if you are a true believer, if you have questions or concerns, then you should not be asking for empirical evidence, that there shouldn't have to be a miracle that you can take a photo of or make a recording of, or that produces an image of something that everyone can see. That a true believer is somebody that says, I'm following this pathway from these people, from this history, and this is what we believe, and this is how I operate. So that is not based on empirical observation. Most of us, though, are somewhere in the middle, where there's certain questions that we need to investigate, and I really need it to be data, versus other parts of the human experience where I really need to be interaction with other people, and we are not really testing or super questioning, we're just having interaction. Okay, so we'll start this one and then we'll come back next time, we'll do the rest. But let's look at belief then, the concept of belief. We're going to have an A, B, C parts of this quick conversation, and then we won't be looking at this for the whole rest of the course. But let's look right now levels of awareness. And again, this is all the time in our society. So it's not anything that isn't happening. It is something that is not science experience. So beliefs then are sometimes divided into something they're called core beliefs. And those are things that you actively think about. Previously, on the first slide when we looked at this, I said that beliefs can be based on something supernatural. It could be about something else going on. And then I said, or it could be that you have belief or faith in a thing. For us right now, historically, in the society that you're operating in right now, one of those things would be a corporation, businesses. We literally sometimes take the name of a company and apply that to something they manufacture and just use the company name to talk about their product. And you've seen, those of you that are going into marketing and business and so forth in that way, that a lot of times when we know or they know that they have a lot of followers and they're just kind of jogging your memory and bringing it up all the time and showing them, yes, we're still there, we're on your side, we're producing all these things. You'll see advertisements where they never even show you the product that they want you to buy. It's really just saying, oh, you know, you are Apple, you are whatever it is. So core beliefs. Now, when you have core beliefs, and you all do, of course, you know what those are because you've actively thought about it or participated in it. You've had conversations, personal or family events, cultural or social rules, like what is food and what is not food, or what is the correct behavior of people of a certain age versus people of another age. What kinds of things are okay to do versus not okay. When we judge another person, what would be judgmentally that set of rules or standards that you're looking to check off on the box. So these can be your foundation of the values that you have, your judgments, goals. For instance, what defines a good person? That's not the same thing in every society. I'm sure that most of you are aware of that because we have so much more media that we can take a look at that's from all different kinds of places around the world. Not all of them that are out there, but quite a few. So those are core beliefs. You know about those. You've had a conversation. For instance, you know how your family sees things politically or financially, and so on and so forth. And then the second one, we'll just do this one and then we'll come to a stop on this, dispositional. Dispositional. In dispositional beliefs, even in our society, it can happen that you're going through your life, you're learning tons of stuff, you're making your plans for your future, you have your social interactions, your creativity, if you want it or not, physical things that you do that you like a sport or activity or not much, and you know about those. Dispositional then, things will be things that are kind of floating around, but you've never really had to think about it, talk about it, aim towards it, or really actually spend much time getting more familiar with certain kinds of concepts. So dispositional things or beliefs will happen sometimes, and we find it very entertaining when you'll see people that will come up to people on the street and say, hey, would you mind answering a couple of questions for a moment? What do you think about this? Or how did you react to that? Or do you know who this person is? Those sorts of things. Usually the ones that get up recorded more often than not are going to be for more entertainment, where the person doesn't seem to have really ever thought about it before, but then jumps in anyway. Now, in some cultures in the world, people do not jump in if they don't have a lot of data. And there are places in the world where it is illegal to voice your beliefs in public, especially not to a stranger. You could get in a lot of trouble. So this, again, globally is not something that's going on all the time. So dispositional, when you are having your first experience with something and try to step forward with how you think that might be going. Okay, so this will be where we stop today.